All right, so we're back with another a gift from Dad. And so what's your name?
Andrew Morgan.
Andrew Morgan. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Andrew. Where you from?
I grew up in Maryland and been in Florida about 2 years now. Okay, and with that, traveled a little bit, but primarily lived in Maryland and just saw the country through work and other things like that. So, yeah.
Okay, so you got any children?
Yep, 2 sons.
Two sons? What are their ages?
36 and 35, 34.
All right, so
Don't tell them.
Hey, I probably
After a certain point, man, it's up to them to keep it.
Yeah, I start to forget myself. I forget how old I am sometimes. But so, do you remember life before the children?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I as I said, grew up in Maryland, grew up in Annapolis. I grew up in a neighborhood where we all kind of went from kindergarten all the way up through high school together. So, in that one place, and with those kind of that kind of stability and that kind of a foundation,
The tight knit community.
Yeah,
Like
really
the communal raising.
Yeah, and you really don't realize it until you get older. Just a difference that makes. Having those lifelong peers around you, and a huge difference. And then joined the Air Force and stationed at Andrews Air Force Base in Suitland, Maryland.
Okay.
And with that, not too far from home, but far enough to really kind of connect and kind of find myself. My wife and I, we've been married for 36 years now.
Oh, that's a lifetime. That's how old I am, 36.
And so, and we actually both grew up in Annapolis. So didn't know each other when we were younger, but her best friend, my best friend, brother and sister, and right around high school, got to know each other and pretty much been together.
High school sweetheart, basically.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to go back to the beginning, because us young men, we feel like we only need leadership from dads and stuff like that. Tell me about your relationship with your mom and the importance. You just brought up your wife. The importance of having a young man having a strong woman in their life.
Okay, here's a strange thing. Not a strange thing, but here's a reality, right? Women can raise boys, but they can't raise men. The reason being is that you learn how to be a man by modeling. So there are just certain, I don't want to say we're wired differently, but we're wired differently. There's certain things, certain nuances that you learn from other men. So for me, my dad died when I was very young. I was 2 years old when he died. He was 22. My mom married when I was about four or so, and so I had a stepdad. But even aside from that, I had uncles. My dad's uncle married my great aunt, so there were 2 families that kind of came together. So I had connections. I had family connections that were very rich and very, very well connected. In fact, in Severna Park, which is where the family is, about 15 minutes outside of Annapolis, there was a small kind of community, really, but it was called Packtown, and our family name is Pack. Oh. So it was all, aunts and uncles and just family there, not to mention family, in Severna Park and just in that area. So there were a lot of strong male models. My Pop Joe, who was my great uncle, was one, and I kind of saw it go from when I was born. We lived in my great grandfather's household under his roof until I was about 4 years old, and so I was very close to my great grandfather. He passed at he was 81 when I was born. He passed at 103. So for 20 plus years, that relationship was there. And so I learned a lot from just being in his presence. I learned a lot from just getting to know him. I learned lessons that were not just words that someone was telling me, but I learned it through observation.
Okay, so when you're speaking about your grandpa and your uncles and everybody, another question for you. Did, what is the importance of strong male figures? And what are some things that you learned from them that you use with your children, your boys?
So, I think, again, we model. The examples that we have are the examples that we follow. And it becomes second nature in a sense. It becomes almost a unspoken standard that you have for yourself. So, my great-grandfather was born in 1886. So if not his parents, I think his grandparents were enslaved. And that thread, right now we look at history, we look at African American history in this country, and for some it's disconnected because the experiences that they're having today are far removed from the experiences that previous generations had. But for me, being able to sit and listen to him. Just share his experiences, being able to hear my great aunt share, their experiences and her experiences growing up. It made all of this current history for me.
Okay.
So it gave me a greater sense of my role and my place in our generational journey, understanding the opportunities that were available to them and the opportunities that were not. But through it all, understanding their will, their ability to strive and to grow, given the circumstances that they were born into, those patterns are something that once they're ingrained, each generation is actually able to take it further. The lessons in the person that you are becomes it's fundamentally based off of that same foundation, but the times give you different opportunities. The times will present, just as I said, just different opportunities. And it's funny because now things are accelerating a lot faster. So a lot of things, and for most people, what they don't understand is that a lot of the things that they consider to be normal, it's only normal for them.
Yeah.
So time moves forward. Right, and whatever time you're born into through your formative years, that becomes what you define as the world.
Yeah.
But it's never been that way, or it wasn't that way before you got here, exactly the way that it is when you get here, and it won't be the way going forward. So when you look at things like technology, when you look at things like even family values and other things like that, whatever we consider to be normal is just a reflection of the time that we arrived here.
Yeah.
But it's always been fluid. It's always been growing. It's always been moving. So when I look at when I look at the relationship that I had with my great grandfather and my aunts and uncles, what it gave me was a sense of not just who I am and who they are, or were for those who passed, but it gave me a sense of knowledge or almost an obligation to understand the time that I'm in so that I can take it forward, so that I can seize the opportunities that are available at this particular
So question, do you share or have you shared any of those values with your boys? Meaning, have you ever sat and discussed race with them? You just mentioned when we're born in the time that we're born in, it's not the same as the time before. However, like me and my dad, we talk about crutch people. People lean on that past sometimes, like, oh, we had it so bad. But now, it's really not that bad as what you make it. So what do you think about that?
In terms of having those discussions with my sons, it's not something that we explicitly sit and talk about. My interest is to set an example that they follow. Words are good, but conversations, so much can get lost in a conversation. I mean, you can literally take a classroom full of young adults and teach them all the same thing, and they will all have different experiences with that knowledge. So the knowledge is, you can intellectually discern something and understand it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have an impact. So it really is the example. And that example is one, taking responsibility, meaning that, whatever happens, even if it's not your doing, you're still the one who's responsible for your response. And Jesse Jackson said it really, really eloquently years ago, when he said that you might not be responsible for knocking yourself down, but you are responsible for picking yourself up.
I agree with that 100%.
And that's that's one of those core lessons. That's something that, regardless of what's going on around us in the world, when you take responsibility, you actually shift your locus of control from an external locus of control to an internal locus of control. So instead of looking at what they did or what's happening here or the circumstance or situation, you look at, okay, how can I respond to this? How can I reply to it? What can I do? And sometimes it's a lesson. Most of what we go through, whether we really want to admit it or not, it's our own doing. Things that show up occasionally or one time are events. So if I get in my car and I go out and I have an auto accident, that's an event. But if I get in my car and I go out and I'm now on my 5th accident, there's something that I'm routinely doing that's causing that outcome. And so I have to take responsibility for how I'm driving. Again, the one-off can happen. Someone could hit you. No one can predict what will happen. Events are very different from those routines that are actually guiding and driving your life. So for anybody, and I stress this with my sons, if it's repeated, if it's happening, it's because there's a habit or routine in terms of a cause that's creating that outcome. So taking responsibility means that this journey is really about our own personal growth. Mm-hmm. The times will always change. They'll continue to change. But how you show up and the approach that you take to living this journey that we're on it's really up to you, and that's where the personal responsibility truly comes into play.
So as you were growing up as a young man, let's bring it back before the children. Was there anything that you had to take accountability for, or anything you struggle with that you look back now like it taught you valuable life lessons?
Some of I think when you enter into adulthood, there's a role that you aspire to that's greater than understanding who you are and how you became the person that you are. In our younger life, we're actually moving through roles, and so we're trying to live up to the role. So there's not as much introspection as there might be when we get a little older, because we're just trying to live up to that role. Mm-hmm. Transitioning from being a dependent in a family household to being my own person. That's a role. And so we're not looking at, okay, how do I need to, what do I need to, no, we're really just trying to find our way through the different roles. There's always a time, for me personally, I've always had an interest in understanding human nature and really more understanding my own nature. So Abraham Maslow uses the term impulse voice, or he used the term and had this concept about our impulse voice. And what he's saying, or what he was referring to, is that everyone has an impulse voice that voice is not one that has been influenced by other people.
It lacks reason too, maybe sometimes, that impulse voice.
And what it does though is it really, before you understood what words meant, you had that voice. Mm-hmm. That voice was guiding that behavior that you have. So impulse voice it's not a negative in terms of it being about not having control of self-discipline. The impulse voice is just saying these are your preferences. So we all have a certain way of looking at the world. We all have a certain way of processing things. And our impulse voice is one that would say, for instance, you may have someone who processes things creatively. right? You may have another person who processes things mathematically, meaning that they're more concrete in their thinking. That's the impulse voice. So what it does though is it's always there as we're moving from one role to another role in our life. And for me, my impulse voice, after having taken time to really understand, myself, my impulse voice has been pretty much, I would say, three primary characteristics. One is that I've always loved to discover things. So my impulse voice was always one of curiosity. So curiosity was more important to me than anything, and being able to satisfy it, and being able to get out and to discover things. I remember on my great grandfather's property, after we'd moved away, it seems like we were there. Like 2-3 times a week. Our families is always. It seems like we were always there. But I remember once there was he had about an acre of land, and it wasn't rural. I mean, Savannah Park is there are pockets of developments that are right on the Severn River, and some that are a little further removed from it. And so I would go out, and I was always exploring. From the time I was a little kid, I remember going out once and finding a piece of blue glass. And when I dug it up, it was probably about, in my mind, at that time, it was huge, but it's probably about that. Yeah. It was a chunk, but it was unusual in that glass is typically flat. Yeah. Glass is typically used as something that you're looking through, or as a lens, or whatever it is. This one was like a rock. It was a chunk. The edges weren't so sharp that they would cut you, but you could see almost like a flint-like effect in terms of how it would. So I find it out in the mud, out in this. On his property, and I went back, cleaned it up, and I presented it. And I remember a number of instances where I was discovering something, I was preparing it to present, and then I was presenting it to someone. So my impulse voice has always been one of discovery, and then that transitioned naturally into self-discovery. So for me, that's the voice that's always been in my head. It was. It was learning by doing. It was learning by discovering, and so I went through that process, and I would always revisit it. But again, I'm like any other person. As you move through life and you take on a new role, you have their expectations, and you want to live up to the expectations. So I learned a lot intentionally, just based on the fact that I love learning. Okay. And those lessons, and I'll share those other impulse voices as we go a little further. But those lessons and understanding the importance of taking personal responsibility. And to get back to your question, was there ever a time when I needed to hold myself accountable? Yeah, I'm like anyone else. I learned from the bad examples and the things that I didn't do well, as well as the things that I have done well. And for me, that makes it more than just a concept. I see it both ways. I know the result and what happens when you take personal responsibility, and I know also that sense of empowerment that you have as a result of it. I honestly believe that we're driven to achieve as human beings. It's natural. It is something that's within us, whether we realize it or not. When you were born, you couldn't do anything for yourself. And that growth process that you went through was clearly evident because of the fact that you were physically changing. You go through that period when you can't walk, so you're crawling, and then you get to a point where you can stand, and you get to a point where you can then start taking steps, and you get better balance, and you get to a point where you can walk and then run and all those things. That process is, it's very easy for others to acknowledge it or to validate it because you can see it. What I believe is that when we get older, that process doesn't stop. The only thing that ends is the visible manifestation of our growth. So the physical manifestation of our growth is something that's happening now internally because we've gone from we've reached our physical peak when we get to a point, and then we go into that part that the physical decline. But what the body's going through is not as it's not as much of it's not as visible as the fact that you still need to grow. I think it was Jordan Peterson. I know very controversial these days, but Jordan Peterson.
I like Jordan Peterson a lot.
Yeah, he said that human beings are designed to walk uphill, meaning that we're not designed for a life of leisure.
It's not supposed to be easy.
Right.
And that's why I teach my children. And anybody I listen, they tell me it's hard. It's supposed to be.
Right, and it's because that's hard is only another word for something that you've not yet mastered. That's all it is.
Yep.
And so if you understand that, then and you're on that path of continual growth and continuous improvement, more for the purpose of being a more, in my opinion, and my interest in it is that it's my journey to become a more efficient human being. This experience that we have, that we call life, is to me just an experience. And it's, I learned that lesson when I learned it after having accomplished something that was really good and kind of elevating. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when you've been working on something and you're able to accomplish it and you take your life to the next level, you are entering at the bottom of that next group. So, there are people who were there before you, there were people who were there longer than you, there are people who were there, who've been there. They've done it.
It's like the military. You start off, you in the East, you may become an officer, but you're at the bottom of the office.
Exactly. And that's, and here's the thing to think about, Algier, is that if your motivation for growth is to better yourself from the viewpoint of comparison. It's like I grew up in a very humble household. Socioeconomic class I would say was working class, lower working class.
Yeah.
And so I grew up with this idea that my value is in my accomplishment. It's in the possessions, because I was very much aware of the fact that we weren't in the middle of that group. We were on the lower end of it. And for me, I say that because I grew up in a neighborhood. There were houses, and there were working class families in houses, and we were in an apartment. And so I recognize, as most of us do, kind of where our position is, and we start to do that comparison thing. I can tell you one of the most not a turning point, but I think an example of how all of this motivated me was when I think about the time that I had to borrow sleigh rides. And what I mean by that is, I grew up in a time where in Maryland you get your snowfalls.
Yes,
and
it
you
was
would get
a lot
some
of
really
snow.
good snowfalls.
Yeah.
And this was the time before you could keep your road, you could de-ice roads with chemicals. Salt trucks had to come out, they had to scrape it. So basically, if you had a good snowfall in the neighborhood, which was a lower priority in terms of them clearing the streets, you could very easily end up with about an inch or two of ice on the road, which is perfect for sleigh riding.
Yeah.
So, we had two hills in our neighborhood, two streets that were hilly. One was Rosewood Hill, the other was Hicks Avenue. And Rosewood is where all the kids in the neighborhood would get together and we'd sleigh ride. And that was a big thing. When you have a snow day, it's like the most exciting thing.
I miss it. I'm from Jersey, so I know.
Yeah,
I know. I used to have a blast.
Snow days are incredible. And so you have the snow falling, and you can't wait to get up in the morning and go out and to enjoy the snow.
Yep.
And we would play, we played full-on tackle football.
Yep. I grew up with all of that.
Yeah. And so, all the kids would get together and, we'd do sleigh riding. When I say all the kids, we're talking about maybe 20 or 30, kids. Pretty close neighborhood, but a lot of.
Well, you don't see it. What you don't see anymore. Not
right.
anyway. Yeah.
And so I didn't have a sleigh. In fact, I never had a sleigh growing up. So I would, I'm going to the hill because we're all going to have fun. And I had friends who would let me use their sleigh to go down and make it back up. Then they were going. And so all of those things, those experiences, made me acutely aware of lack and what I don't and didn't have. So I grew up with the idea that that's not going to be me. I'm going to show the world.
But question, what about what you did have?
So that is in the mind of a hungry and ambitious child. You can't see it. But then that's no different than it is for anyone. It's so the one thing that I've learned over time is that the world always offers you more than the eye can see. The problem is that you can only see what you focus on. So if you've ever seen any selective awareness test, or if you've ever seen any of those type things, we know our reticular activation system prevents us from seeing everything and taking everything in when we're in an environment. It just can't focus on every individual piece of input. So our mind has the ability to just focus on what we say is relevant. And when you're as a kid, not fatherless because I had a stepdad, but the other kids in the neighborhoods had their natural fathers. And so, you begin to become aware of what you don't have.
I want you to touch on that a little bit about you having a stepdad and the other children having their actual natural father. Talk more about how that affected you as a young man.
It didn't have. It affected me only in a very strange way. It affected me in that as I grew, I began to understand the advantage. And the advantage is that I don't have someone who necessarily sees me in their own image, and therefore I'm able to create myself. I was able to create myself. So with my sons, I'm their dad. So who I am in my mind is it's going to impact who they are. I got to create all of that. And it's funny because what I learned later in life is that I really wasn't creating it anyway, because there were so many similarities between my natural father and the person that I became. It's just that I felt like I didn't have, I felt like I had a certain freedom to be, who I was. Because when you're a kid, I'll be honest with you, the influence of a father is not like, kicks and giggles. It's like authority and discipline, and this is and because their expectations are what they are. So for me, that impact wasn't necessarily. It wasn't a negative impact in my mind. What it did, though, is that it actually it made me feel like an outlier.
Okay.
Made me feel like everyone else has this, and it became just another example in terms of what others had that I didn't have. So that lack mentality was very strong, and it was also very motivating. So I think the hardest thing for people sometimes is to become aware of what their motivation is. A motivation that's based on comparison is very, very difficult, and it's only going to get you. It's only going to take you so far. A motivation that's also a motivation that's based on lack. I never had, so I want. I grew up in an apartment. There's almost 4,400 square feet. 6 bedrooms, 4.5 bathrooms, an office, big family room, 3-car garage. And this is in part it comes from that. It comes from
filling the void.
What I learned though, going back to that experience that I was telling you about, when I say that you come in at the bottom, when my wife and I, the home that we raised our kids in, we got rid of it, moved out of that, and we bought a condo. And so the condo was in Baltimore, Maryland, in an area called Locust Point, which is it's where Fort McHenry is, and that part, really nice part of Baltimore. In fact, when the Key Bridge came down, national news, we could see the Key Bridge from our condo. It's like right there. So it's right on that peninsula, right at the very end of Locust Point is Fort McHenry, and you're a few blocks from that. So this building that we moved into it's a luxury condo building that was a repurposed grain silo, thus the name Silo Point. That was the grain silo was built in 1926. They repurposed it. It's one of the most recognized and award-winning residential buildings built in Baltimore. Really, really nice. Floor-to-ceiling windows, beautiful views. You're looking at the city. Yeah, all the bells and whistles, and there were you had pro athletes who lived there. You had the one guy, Al. He ran the Baltimore Visitors Bureau or something like that. So you had a lot of really doctors, very, very accomplished people there. So we lived on the 7th floor, and our parking space was on the 7th floor. So the parking space, the parking garage ran parallel to the building that we were in. And so every day it was like going to a car show. So as I'm pulling out, I'm seeing Bentleys, Ferraris. One neighbor had a Ferrari California that he got rid of for a Porsche 911 GT3.
Those are nice cars. Yeah, that's a nice. Yeah, the RS.
So, carbon fiber and all that extra bit. So you look at that and it's like, wow, that car at the time that he bought it, base was $350,000 base. So that's what you're seeing. So we had a Mercedes SLK, fun car, lovely car, fun car. We had that convertible. We had two Mercedes. We had that one in a E-Class, and then we got rid of E-Class and got a CLS. And so because this is just that's just how we roll.
But this before the children or after?
After the kids.
Okay.
This is after kids. So the thing about it is that one day when I was it probably had been there for maybe 8 months, and that feeling of this is the coolest place in the world was starting to wear off. And what I realized is that when I realized exactly what I told you. When you elevate, you're coming in at the bottom. So even though this is like the best that I've ever had, even though this may be better than what a lot of a lot of people that I know have, even though everyone who would visit us would just stand there and go awe at the view and just be like, you can see that hypnotic look that would just come over their face because of the view. Even though all those things were going on, if my motivation to get there is based on what I don't have, when I get there, I will continue to look for what I don't have. So that's how a lot of people accomplish things. That's how if you're accomplishing things because of a sense of lack, the danger is that you've trained your mind to recognize lack.
Yeah, I do. I struggle with that.
Yeah, when you get to that next level, you're only going to recognize lack again. When we moved here and had the house built, this is the largest one that they offer in this development, right? They don't make them any bigger. And you kind of go, ooh, you take pride in that. And there's that part of you that kind of goes, oh, this is, whatever. And then, you have, we have friends a few blocks over who, same house, but they bump that bad boy out.
Yeah. You like now, you like, dang.
So it's like, we have other friends, they already have their pool built. They already have. And so if you're not careful, what happens is the thing that causes you or the thing that motivates you to accomplish something becomes the thing that causes you to not feel satisfied once you've accomplished it. And that's if you're focusing on that.
All right, so I want to go back to something you said about the stepdad not being your biological, but the fathers are not. What was the word you used? Well, it's not fun, right? So I want to go back to what was your parenting style with your boys? Or are you one of the guys? Hey, you're gonna do what I say, or you let them learn. What is your approach to parenting? And from both of them, you got two. So how did you change from the first to the second and to now?
It was pretty much the same. I mean, as far as I saw it with both. I mean, I came from my place in the generational journey was, I grew up in that time where there was a belt, right? And there was.
Oh, I got a lot of them.
Yeah,
Switches. I had to go
yeah.
pick a switch.
And so, you're kind of wrestling with, okay, new style, old style. And, I'm 6'4", and I can be a very imposing figure. So, it's like I try when it came to the discipline piece of it, it was always by example, but there were old school kind of, that's all, there were times when that's all I knew. It was like that old school way. The one thing though that I was always very much aware of is the fact that is to express love to them and to let them know that that they're loved and that they're special.
That's good, because
heart.
a lot of men we struggle with that. As
Yeah.
fathers, it's like it's soft to tell your boy. I tell my sons I love them every day.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's nothing for me to grab the back of the head and kiss them on the forehead. I mean, that was the thing that I think not having my biological father, that kind of a connection was something that was very important to me. In terms of here's the thing with the way that we parent. It's a combination of how we were parented, along with how we wanted to be parented. So, I think the biggest challenge that we have today is the fact that when you have a generation that transcends the socioeconomic class that it was born into, that generation that transcended the class, they want to give their kids what they wish they had. And you combine that with the fact that, when I was growing up, there were 3 networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS. If you wanted to see cartoons, there was a block of time after school that cartoons aired. It wasn't that it's not like someone had to tell you, turn the TV off, you can't watch. No, it's like cartoons, they're off at like 4 o'clock. It's like done, right? Yeah. And then Saturday morning cartoons, that was another.
I remember those.
So, if you think about where we have kind of, where we've come in terms of society, cartoons are 24/7 now. And instead of 3 networks, there are hundreds of networks that are very specifically focused on a particular interest. So that to me is an example of a generation that grew up and created what they always wished they had. And so it's, that it puts us in a strange place, because we are, what we're able to give our kids is a celebration of the sacrifices that our parents made and the sacrifices that we've made, and then we feel sometimes as if we're elevating, the family, and we're elevating our tribe, so to speak, when we're able to give more to our kids.
But sometimes that can be not so good, because you could make weak children.
Exactly. And it's not, it's funny, but weak is defined on the time, based on the time in which we were born. But it's not the true definition of it. We have to, and we will, and we do grow and evolve and change. And we're not locked into certain times of our history or of our generational experiences. We're not locked into that unless we try to lock into it, unless we try intentionally to hold on to it. But when you do that, you're doing it at the price of advancing. There are a couple of things. I'm not sure if you're familiar with wave theory, but wave theory is basically an understanding of the social patterns that have always been in place. So, there are times of tolerance and times of intolerance, and there's a book called Pendulum that speaks to it. There's a lot of work out there about the fourth, it's not fourth wave, but the fourth something, I can't read it. And I know this, I've read it, it's just not coming back to me, but what that basically helps you to understand is that societies go from one extreme to the other. And it's the extreme that triggers the return to the opposite. And so those extremes trigger the return, right? So if you try to hold on to or lock on to the good old days or the values, or which is what we defined them as family values from the past, but it was just the behaviors, the family behaviors that we had. It wasn't the family values, it was the behaviors that were exhibited. If you try to lock and hold on to that, what happens is that you slow the growth. It's the way that we get away from it, from one generation to the next, is that we leave home.
All right, so you're talking about the wave theory. I truly believe that too. I believe we should all be formless anyway, and we gotta be present with the times, right?
Right.
But for you, with your boys, do they have to do? I mean, how can I word this? With your boys, as far as their career path or school and education, is it like a must that they do something that you want them to do, or you allow them to do what they want?
They follow their own path.
Okay.
They follow their own path. Here's the thing. If you come from a working class background, what a working class parent will teach their children in terms of education and in terms of what matters most is how to provide for yourself. They can't teach them those higher levels of being
Entrepreneurship and things like that.
So it's like, that's when you understand that basically as a parent, you are teaching, instructing, guiding, and leading based on your own limitations. If you think about that, yes, we want our children to be successful. Yes, we want our children to thrive. Yes, we want that next generation to be strong. But you can't teach them what you don't know. If you've not experienced it yourself, you can't really teach that. And so, it requires, again, instilling those basic core principles in their life that you feel work for you, but also allowing them to develop and create their own. So to answer your question, it's not, and you know what, it's like, I'm only speaking from my own experience. So everyone has their own approach with things, everyone, and that's the beauty of all this, is that, free will means that there is no right or wrong way to do it. And literally, I'm telling you, because if you look at some of the most successful people in the world today, the parenting that they had was not ideal. You look at the fact that you look at somebody like Oprah Winfrey. I mean, who she is a result of the adversity that she had to face growing up, not the love and not the giving and not the guidance. So, the other side of it is that if you, with that strong hand, what you create is someone who will follow someone else. And creating that person, that's great if that's what you have to give. But there's more. And for me, understanding that only from my own perspective, only from my own experience. Understanding that means that, okay, it's not about do this, do that, because quite frankly, the opportunities are not the same. Mm-hmm. The workforce is incredibly different today than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago.
I just had this conversation with my father-in-law, because he's from that, he's probably about 80 now. In his mind, it's you get that one job, you stay there the 20, 30 years, you retire, you do this. Now, it's not the same anymore, because I drove trucks prior to me getting into physical therapy. He couldn't understand, how would you stop doing this to do something else? Right. The workforce is different now. People don't retire anymore. The pensions is almost gone,
Absolutely. And that's a key example. We think that what's certain is what we were born into. Mm-hmm. So we think that if you want to be successful as a human being, do this. But it's changed so much that a parent's advice if it's too rigid, it will limit and restrict that child. The other piece to it is that when you are really, really good at forcing your kids to come under your authority, you've basically given the world someone that they can use because they're accustomed to
more workers for the factory.
Yeah, you're making more workers, exactly. And so that's the thing, is that we have to be aware of how and what we're teaching. And most don't understand the impact that the socioeconomic class they were born into and the time in which they were born. They don't understand how it's created a very, not limited, but a very specific reality for them. That's not the full picture. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. I mean, it's, as a parent, it's like understanding that means that sometimes you have to make sure that they're aware of what's going to possibly create harm for them, but at the same time, for me, I don't dictate the steps.
Yeah, put a little more slack on the leash, per se.
It's kind of the thing that I find is that my interest is knowing what you want. What do you want to get to? What do you want to do? Without telling you what that destination is. And then there are opportunities as a father to share insights that are related to two things. One, is this going to help you or is this going to hurt you? Is this going to move you in the direction that you want to go, or is this going to prevent you from getting there? So at the end of the day, it's not my word or my advice. It's the thing that you're trying to get to that's kind of guiding your process. And you have to learn that not on your own, but you have to learn how to do that by yourself. There is Riaz, what's his name?
Riaz.
Yeah, Paul. You know what? I must be getting old because I'm. But it's the four agreements.
Okay.
Four agreements. One of the things that I loved about some of the insights that he has there, I want to say Dan Miguel Riaz, but that does not sound right. But one of the things that one of the agreements that he shares is that has to do with our inner judge. Okay. And the way that he explains the inner judge is that everybody has that voice that they hear in their head. If it's a critical voice that you hear, chances are it came from external judges when you were younger, who then became internalized. So, for instance, you and I enjoy writing, right? One of the reasons why a lot of people don't write is because they have that inner judge, that critic, that may have been that third grade teacher who told them, you didn't do good, or they got that paper back and they had red marks on it, and so they've internalized an authority figure, and that's now an internal judge. The thing with an internal judge is, as I said, it comes from having strong external judges. Mm-hmm. So if you think about this, I've had conversations with people where sometimes the best student is the person who's most critical of themselves. The perfectionist is a person who basically have an internal critic that causes them to keep pushing. So you go, okay, that's a good thing, right? I mean, that means that I'm challenging myself and on. The problem is that once the internal judge judges you as not being good enough or not being worthy, the penalty is happiness and joy. Meaning that if you have an internal judge that's causing you to beat yourself up, you cannot be happy in the presence of that judge, because the penalty for not being enough is unhappiness. Basically, the stronger the hand that's growing and molding and shaping that child, the stronger their internal judge will be, unless they completely rebel against the person who's the authority figure.
But parents fathers in particular, we could struggle with that as well, by the judgment of your parenting style.
So that is generally, it's an open wound. That style of parenting, in my opinion, is a result of open wounds that that parent has that they haven't healed themselves. So if you think about it, a parent who's going to be a strong authority figure typically came from a parent who was a strong authority figure. And it's the other way. It goes the other way as well. A parent who's very lax in terms of authority probably came from that, or they came from an authority figure that they are rebelling against. Mm-hmm. So I say all of that to say that when it comes to parenting styles, there are so many variables that the only thing anyone can really share is their own style. But in sharing that style, what they need to understand is how much of their style of parenting is coming from things within them that they need to heal. The other side of it is I've been working on a book, and it seems like I'm always working on a book, but this particular one, this is
Tell me about it.
pretty heavy. It's there's a lot more kind of going into this, and one of the things that I talk about is the warrior, the warrior, the person who worries, mm-hmm. and the whisperer. And tell me if this makes sense. We all have a warrior within us. We all have that worry side, that concern side. And most of us will live our lives through one or the other. Mm-hmm. One will typically trigger the other. If you worry too much, you just shake it off and then you go into your warrior mode. If you stay in the warrior mode too much and you need to be a little more concerned because of maybe the impact it's having on a relationship, then you shift over to the worry or whatever it might be. The problem with both of those is that neither one of them, it represents who you are authentically. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is this: the warrior in us is a mask. We put it on just like from a tribal standpoint. From a tribal standpoint, masks were worn to inflate. They were worn to strike fear. They were worn to just kind of puff you up a little bit. When you're wearing that mask and you're in that warrior mode, the problem is that that's not who you are. Yep. When you are in the worry mode, for that person who spends time just worrying about things that might happen, be concerned about, I'm not doing enough of this, I'm not doing enough of that, or this is going to happen or that could happen. When you stay in that mode, it's not a mask that you're wearing, it's a shield that you're putting up. But neither one of those are who you are authentically. It's
really hard to find that balance.
But here's the thing. In between, here's a good indicator, and we all need to find it. We know that we are our authentic selves when, one, we're not threatened. We don't feel threatened. Mm-hmm. We don't feel threatened, and we don't feel a need to conquer. Right? When you eliminate those two things, then that true self comes through. And here's the best indication of knowing whether or not you are your authentic self is truly your ability to connect with others. The warrior and the warrior will not connect with other people. They will isolate you because they are on their own quest. If you're not able to connect authentically and in a very real way with other people, it's because either you're threatened by them or you have and feel a need to conquer them. Mm-hmm. Which is the same thing. It's a threat from it.
It's actually something cool to think about.
Well, and here's an example of this is how I came to realize what and who my authentic self is. When I have two granddaughters. So Violet, she'll be 4 at the end of June, and I have Chastity in Northern Virginia. So a little one. She's a little new one. Not even 1 year old yet. When I hold my grandchild, my granddaughters, I'm authentic. Mm-hmm. That's who I am. That's the real me. There's no threat. There's no need to conquer. If I, as a parent, if I don't understand who I am authentically, then the warrior will try to parent the child. Mm. Because what you're trying to impart to them is that the world is a mean and dangerous place. And if you want to get ahead, you got to be able to go up and get out and go do it and take it. And so we try to parent our children through that mode of thinking, which is damaging. It is absolutely damaging. And it's coming from the fact that you have not reconciled these things within yourself. You don't understand that the authentic self is not threatened by the world around it.
So what advice you have for young parents, young fathers out here that are struggling with that's trying to find, to get rid themselves of the warrior or the worrier?
Awareness is the first step. It's not a process that you can intellectually discern and then just make happen. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Most behavioral changes won't come just from understanding it. Just knowing that I'm in warrior mode won't prevent me from going into warrior mode. But the awareness is something that initially you can process through reflection. And I know, I mean, this is kind of that Zen kind of hippy-dippy thing that not everybody gets, but
no, that's what I'm into.
You know, your mind is something that you have to figure it out. And when I say you have to figure it out, you have to understand the difference between a thought and thinking. A thought is something that you did not invite into your head. A thought is something that was triggered. It comes in. Once the thought comes in, it expands, it spirals, it grows, it creates a feeling. Once it gets the emotion, the action is compulsory. You cannot very easily derail a thought when it's made its way to a feeling. And that feeling needs to come out. But if you make a habit of just kind of taking responsibility for your behavior and what you do, and how you feel, you then create enough of a gap to kind of go, okay, is this moving me closer to what I want or further away from it? Mm-hmm. And that's like the time and the work has to be put in. It takes time. What I'm working on is actually designed to help someone kind of navigate that. How do you know when you're in warrior mode? How do you know when you're not? And the thing about it is that it's not about suppressing it. It's not about eliminating it, rather. It's about knowing when it's time to use it.
Yeah, because when you brought it up, initially, my first thought, I was like, oh, maybe I feel like I'm in warrior mode. Oh, no. And actually, I worry sometimes, too. It reminded me of the warrior and the gardener. Similar. You heard that before. Mm-hmm. So I would rather be a warrior in the garden instead of the gardener in the war.
Yes.
You know.
Well, but here's the consider this. If I understand my warrior mode, I understand when I need it, mm-hmm. but I also understand how to have it stand down. The idea is that you don't want to exist in either one of those modes.
Yeah, full time.
Full time.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not, but they're very useful at the right time. Right?
Yeah,
so,
I just identified, as soon as you spoke of it, I'm like, oh, I can identify with both.
Right. And this is how you can tell if you're not able to manage the warrior. If you ever find yourself driving home after work and you're having a conversation with a person who's not there about something that they did, that's the warrior that's not standing down. Mm-hmm. And what happens is if you stay in that mode, the warrior will have those conversations and it will prepare you to go to battle the next time that situation occurs. Mm-hmm. And so you lose your objectivity because of the fact that you're fighting a battle all by yourself and actually within yourself that others don't understand. And then you become the problem.
Yeah, that's like somebody driving for 55 minutes. Like, you would make me upset. I get in my car and drive all the way to 50. I have 55 minutes to be like, this is BS, man. And I come over there mad the whole way. I'm the problem now.
And that's the thing. And the real problem is the fact that the time that you spend dealing with a battle that's not there is time that you're losing to help really kind of focus your mind to get to whatever it is you really want to get to in life. And that's the damage that it does. Is it's one of the hugest. It's a huge distraction. So, and the same thing with worry. If for someone who can't sleep at night, that's the worrier. That's that worry mind that's just taking control of your thoughts. or that's showing up as thoughts that's keeping your mind racing. If you have trouble sleeping, it's usually because of worry. If you have trouble focusing and advancing something in your life, in your world, chances are you're living in warrior mode. So the warrior, here's the thing, again, bringing it back to parenting. Worriers and warriors are the worst parents in the world because of the fact that they're raising a soldier for a battle that soldier potentially will not have to ever wage. And it prevents and it distracts from actually accomplishing or doing something that's more in line with what you want to get done. So until you can understand those two sides of yourself, and then that middle piece is the whisperer, which is, I call it the whisperer because I believe that's where the authentic self lives. The thing about the whisperer is you can't decide that the whisperer is going to be in charge, but the whisperer can enter into your being simply by taking deep breaths. Mm-hmm. And that is I use that as a way of thinking, okay, it's time, I need to bring the whisperer in. Because again, as a human being,
the mediator.
Yeah, as a human being, as a Black American, here's the other side of it though. There's so many triggers that will put us in warrior mode. Mm-hmm. So many triggers.
Something simple as watching a movie like Rosewood or something like that. It drives me crazy.
Oh yeah, there's so many things that will put us in warrior mode, and we feel as though if we don't get in that mode, if we don't live in that mode, then we are selling out, or we're not appropriate to whatever else is going on around us. There's a time when you need to live in that warrior mode, but there's also a time when the whisperer is that part of you that can help you to advance whatever it is you're really trying to advance. And unless you are a person whose primary focus in life is to address certain societal ills and shortcomings. And that's not everybody. That's not most people. Most of us work. We have a job. We have a gig. We're earning. There's some who we're all fortunate enough to have, who really devote their life to creating change. But that's not every person. The problem that we have if we stay in warrior mode is that a warrior needs an adversary. Mm-hmm. And if I can't identify an adversary based on what they've done, then I have to identify an adversary based on what I think they did.
Yeah, we tend to create, or we could create one.
We create them. Mm-hmm. And so we waste time and energy fighting a battle that prevents us from actually advancing and moving something forward.
So after hearing you, I have a question. What is maybe the most important lesson, something that is mandatory that you believe a father should instill or teach to their children?
I don't think it's something they should teach. I think that as a person, we need to make sure that we're whole. You can't teach what you haven't experienced. There's not a lesson. What I know about anything in life, 20 years from now, will pretty much be irrelevant, aside from the basic principles and understanding of how to function as a human being. I think that you have to, and this is a hard thing for as an African American male, it's hard to do that work and to make myself whole. But until I do, I can't. What do I have to give my kids? My imperfections, my missteps, my mistakes, my misfortunes. What do I have to give them? If I'm not a whole being myself, the teacher, I can't teach something that I don't even understand. If I don't understand that I'm in warrior mode half the time, and that's the reason why relationships are suffering, or that's the reason why I can't do this or I can't do that, how can I teach my kids? If I don't even understand the fact that that's something that's creating frustration with myself. The other indication, though, really is, we have to ask ourselves, are we happy? If there's anything, if we're not happy as human beings, as a human being, then you can't teach that to your kids. If you don't teach them how to find joy and happiness, what are you teaching them? How to succeed? How to whatever?
But here's the dilemma, right? You're taught. Well, you're older than me, but I'm sure. So if I was kind of taught this, I know you probably heard this before too. Forget your happiness once you're a parent or a husband or whatever like that. It's about these children. Talk about that.
So think about it. If you forget your happiness as a person, then what are you going to teach them? Teach them how to be miserable? Teach them how to give so much of themselves that there's nothing left for them? Is that what we're teaching them? Are we just teaching them that life sucks? I mean, if you really think about it, there are a lot of approaches that we have to parenting. And no, it's not easy. It really isn't. But we have to understand it fully. And again, when we are whole people, we can raise whole people. And that's a process, I mean, that's a process that may take generations.
No, but like you said, that it starts with awareness and I would say education. And so what are your views on the importance of education for your boys and children in general?
Education is tricky. Okay, let's look at it from a collegiate standpoint. Okay, most formal education is for the purpose of getting a job.
Mm-hmm.
So formal education is important based on what your expectations are for the socioeconomic class that you're a part of. And there's value in that. I'm not saying that there's no value, but we have to understand though that in and of itself, that alone is not something that's going to really bring them what you would wish for them. Unless all you wish is that they get paid.
Yeah.
And that gives us a certain comfort because we sometimes mistakenly associate what a person earns or a person's wealth with happiness. It comes back to that because ultimately that's really what you're trying to, that's what as a human being we're trying, that's the pursuit, that's a primary pursuit. Even though we might not express it as that. But we don't want to have inner conflicts. We don't want to have to live with the turmoil of not feeling as though we've done enough or feeling as though we did too much. And as a result of that, happiness is ultimately the thing that we're trying to get to at the end of the actions and the steps that we take. There's a metaphor in my years as a sales and leadership trainer. A metaphor that I used to use is that of Pain Island and Pleasure Island. Mm-hmm. And I cannot remember who I first learned this from, but I give them credit, and I only give, even though I don't have the name, I'm telling you, I learned it from somebody else.
No plagiarism.
I think it may have been Miranda, something, I don't know. But the metaphor is this, and she teaches it in the context of coaching. But it applies in the context of almost anything in life, because once we understand it, we begin to shift how and what we choose to do. So here's the story. Imagine that there are two islands. So this is Pain Island, this is Pleasure Island. Pain Island is a place that where if you're on it, you don't want to be there. It's lacking all the stuff that you need. You feel horrible. The weather's always bad, and there's always danger. There's sharks that are swimming around it. There are poisonous snakes on Pain Island. There's always something there that can take you out on Pain Island. So what you want is to get off of Pain Island and to get to Pleasure Island. The problem is this. The vehicles that we choose to use to get there, we mistaken as the island itself. So if I think that if I can stack if I can put $10 million in the bank, and have it working. I in a bank, but if I can have $10 million that's investing, that's making enough money so that I have complete financial freedom. If I think that that's going to get me, that's going to be Pleasure Island, then I'm mistaken. It's just the boat ride. Mm-hmm. Until I really know what Pleasure Island is, all those things that I might buy, that I might try, that I might aspire to, that are really just boat rides, will not get me to Pleasure Island, because every boat ride can go in any direction. I remember I was doing a training in Southern California, and it was probably about, my hotel was probably about 15 minutes from the Pacific Ocean. And so after the training, after it was a whole week of training, and after my second day there, I decided, okay, I just want to go out and just breathe that ocean air. So I get in the car, drive to what was like a park, right, and it overlooked the Pacific Ocean. So the sun was starting to drop a little bit, and you could see the sun off the ocean, and you can looking at this vast ocean. And I'm standing in the park next to the rail looking, and I look over the rail, and I realize that there's a whole neighborhood below. Mm-hmm. And just out of curiosity, when I went back to the room, I looked up some of the home values. Just curious, because this is oceanfront in California, right in the Pacific Ocean.
A couple million.
Yeah. Well, I looked up one house that was for sale in that neighborhood. It was $28 million. Yeah. And they had, it was on Zillow I was looking, so they break down your mortgage. Mm-hmm. The mortgage for that would be $110,000 a month. The HOA was very reasonable. I think the HOA was only $3,300 a month. It's all relative, right?
What? Yeah.
It's all relative. But my whole point, and the thing that really occurred to me is that if I think a $28 million home is Pleasure Island, I'm mistaken. Because that home, if I move there and I'm thinking this is my Pleasure Island, life is good, and let's say I move in, a couple moves in, and one passes, and everything in that house reminds them of the other one. Yeah. That Pleasure Island, that thing that they thought was Pleasure Island, that's a boat ride that's now taking them to pain on. Yeah. If it's the same thing with anything that we buy, right? You can go out and buy a new car and feel like you're on top of the world.
I did it. I remember.
Well, and let's say somebody at the parking lot at Publix, they open their door into yours and they ding your door. All of a sudden, that vehicle is not taking you to Pleasure Island.
No, that exact story happened to me. My cousin took my car. I had just bought the Maxima I got now. I bought it when it was brand new, shiny, everything in it, panoramic, wood, grain, leather, everything. Get it? I fell asleep one night. My cousin took my car and crashed it on the highway. I woke up the next morning to come out there. So I'm putting the kids in the car, but they get on the other side. And then my son was like, "Hey, Dad, what happened to your door?" I'm like, "What do you mean? Nothing wrong with my car." My cousin standing there the whole time. He's like, "Oh, snap." Long story short, I take him home, and I'm trying to rack in my brain.
Right.
I didn't crash my car. I wasn't even in the car last night. He eventually come out and tell me I took it when you were asleep. I tried to rush and go get something. I'm like, "You mother." And I had to, so, the body shop, they don't pay for insurance stuff. They don't. Right. They made me pay out of pocket stuff. Right. So that was my pain out. And I still got the car.
That's what I'm saying. It's like something, if we associate things with Pleasure Island and we fail to realize that it's just a vehicle to get there, then that vehicle, if we focus only on the vehicle, on that vessel, on that boat ride from one island to the other, we run the mistake of never getting to that true Pleasure Island.
So, all right. So in closing, we're gonna start bringing it to the end. I want to know, what is some advice that you have for new fathers or people that have been struggling to be a father for years? What is some advice you would give them, or motivation that everything is gonna be okay? It's a loaded one.
First of all, I don't think everything will always be okay. And it not being okay might be their journey. My advice to fathers, to mothers, to sons, to daughters, to human beings in general is to understand that your reality is limited. It is only your reality. And if you carry it as if it is what the world is, you run the risk of not really and truly experiencing what the world can be for you. So, the advice is to continue to develop yourself. You can't give what you don't have. And the perpetuation of negative habits and lifestyles happens when we think that we have all the answers and that what we're experiencing is the only experience that a person can have. So expand yourself. I know that sounds really vague, but to me, it is the most important thing. As a human being, we find certainty in the knowledge that we have, but we have to understand that the knowledge we have is not the full scope of the knowledge that's available. And so, keep yourself open to learning. Learning something does not mean necessarily that you agree with it always. We tend to sometimes want to avoid messages that we feel are contrary to what we believe, and it makes us very one-sided. You can look at politics, for instance. If you only watch Fox News, you are 100% certain that what they're telling you is true. If you only watch CNN, you are 100% certain. And they've actually even done studies in terms of those who kind of fall in the middle. What you put in kind of shapes and creates what you perceive as the reality that you live.
Find your whisperer.
Yeah, you gotta, and here's the other thing, and this will probably seem really strange. I don't even know if I want to share this, but a big part of I think of my journey is really understanding that I am not just the person that I see in the mirror. I'm not, and so if I think that I am, and I process the world through the eyes and the mind of the person that I feel I am, then I'm very, very limited in terms of my understanding of it. For me, I do believe that I am I have a soul, I have a spirit, I have a part of me that is faceless, nameless, sexless.
I believe that too.
No race.
My father always taught me that. We're energy.
Yeah. So if that's the case, the experience that I'm having right now is based on the fact that this is the way that I showed up. But it's not the full experience. There's so much more, and I try to stay open to that only because if I go down a different road and I focus purely on that, then there's too much that I miss in the world. So that, the advice is, work on yourself, keep working on yourself. Don't be afraid to do the work. Don't assume that your understanding of the world is the way that the world is. Just don't. I mean, it will, unless it's a really positive one, unless you're really optimistic, you can go with it. But I mean, I'm just saying, it's like, we have to be our best selves in order to be the best parents.
All right. So earlier you mentioned you're working on the book, another book. Tell the people where they can find you at, any projects that you're working on.
Yeah. So what I'm working on now, it's a book. Working title is Beyond the Dream: A Practical Guide to Transforming Big Ideas into Reality. The dreams that I'm talking about are the things, the aspirations that we have as individuals, and understanding the difference between a personal goal and truly a big idea. My understanding of what helps us to be as fulfilled as we can is when we're working on something that makes the world a little bit better. But the problem that we sometimes have is how do you make that happen? How do you go from being a dreamer to a proprietor?
Yeah.
And what I'm working on are those steps. It's the steps, but it's also some real life examples of things that we all see and really don't understand. Where
can they find you to get these books, or just follow you in particular, in general?
So I go into a hole when I develop. So this is what you will see and what you will find, and I'll share with you once we're at that point. The book. Basically, if you're a person who has something that you're working on, something that you think is going to make the world a little better, something that is in you to do, something that you feel very passionate about, then those three things, the book, the podcast, and the website, are really there to help you to do help you to make that transformation. And all the things that we've been talking about, the warrior and all those other things, there are tools in there that can help you to grow and develop in that area. So,
all right, man. Well, thanks for your time today.
yes, sir.
And this is his gift.